So now we're back in our media template control panel, and what we're now interested in is the database update. So we go to the database update and we get to this screen, and here we have several options. So this is what you're going to see. This is what it will look like when you open this page. So you might be thinking, okay, so let's say you're using Weather Display and you're also sending your data to Weather Underground. So you might be thinking, okay, which one should I choose? In such case, I would always recommend using Weather Display or using Cumulus, or in other words, use the primary source. That's simply because we all know that Weather Underground is not the most reliable site out there. So there is no point why that Weather Underground would be a redundant intermediate. So you want to it would go from Weather Display to Weather Underground and from Weather Underground to your database. That's not what we want. In that case, we would go directly from Weather Display or from Cumulus to the database, to the update script. So let's say I'm using Weather Display. Here I have included instructions how to set up Weather Display, and what Weather Display will do is it will create a file called client raw text. And so once you set up your Weather Display, it will upload that file to your server to a location you specified in Weather Display. So here you then enter the URL of that text file. So it will be something like http something mysite.com/client_raw.txt. So we enter the URL of our client raw. And then once we're done with that, it's a standardized file, so we don't have to specify what format it uses and what units, etc. Because since this is standardized, the update script, I made it so that it knows what that file looks like, so it knows where to get the data. So we hit the test before we set the settings. We hit the test, and we get something like this. At the top, we will see the raw data. This is the actual content of the client raw text, and here it's checking all the variables. It's basically checking that the numbers are realistic and that they fall in that interval that you specified in your main settings. So it's checking the wind speed, it's checking the wind gust, precipitation. Every time you see something in red, something's wrong. So in this case, the problem here is that I'm using a client raw that I just generated randomly, and it has some dummy date which was in the future. And as you can see, it's telling me check the format you specified and also the actual values. Well, the problem here was that, as I said, the date time was in the future, and so it won't let me save something that's it knows that there's something wrong with the date because it shouldn't be in the future. So in this case, the summary is that there's a problem with date and time. Nothing will be imported or saved. But as you can see, the rest of the parameters are okay. So the maximum temperature allowed, this again corresponds to the limits that I set in my settings, and it tells me that temperature was okay, maximum humidity okay, and then here it's basically telling me what it calculated. That's for the dew point and apparent temperature. Those are the variables that are calculated based on these values. And if the date was okay, here this would be black, not red, and it would tell me that everything was fine. And in such case, you know that your client raw is okay and can be used. Likewise, here, if we switch to Cumulus, Cumulus uses a different file. It's called real-time text. It's slightly different. It has a different format, but again, the script knows what it looks like. The only thing you have to specify is you have to look in your file, in your real-time text, see what the separator for the date field is, because in some cases it might look like this, in other cases it might look like this. So you simply put, in this case we would put slash, in this case you would put a dash, and here again is the path, so it would be the address of your real-time text, like this. Again, and you would hit test Cumulus, you would get a very similar screen you've seen previously for Weather Display, and it would again load the data. So those are the weather display and Cumulus. And as you can see, if you scroll down here, this here is the URL that you should use for the updates for your cron job. That's what I was talking about previously. This is the URL, and this password here will be your update password, not your admin, not the one that you use to log into your control panel, the one you specified for the updates. And as I said, this one is quite secured, but this one, because it has to be sent via a URL like this, I wanted a separate password for that. So this is the update password. So for now, I've just set mine to XXX, but obviously this will already show you what you have in your main settings. So you should see your update password here. So you should be able to just copy this and paste it to the URL for the cron job. And we can see that it's using the folder update. In particular, it's using the update.php script. And then we have this. There is one thing I want to say, and I think I mentioned it in the wiki. On some servers, if you're executing your cron job from a server directly from command line, not via that cron job page, some servers, what will happen is they will not support the question mark in the URL. So if we look here, let's just copy that, paste it here. If this does not work, if your cron job is not working, and you're using the cron job from a command line, then what you can try is replace this with a space like this. So this might work then. So in case your cron jobs are not working and you're doing that from a command line, this is something you might try. Yeah. And again, if we're using Cumulus, it would basically be the same URL, because if I select Cumulus here, make sure that once you're done with this, you hit the save settings. But first check the test and then save. And it will tell, as you can see, they both use the update.php. And that script will load your settings to see which file it should expect. And based on that, it will parse the data and save them to your database. Okay, now I mentioned that MediaBridge works slightly differently. And if you're using MediaBridge, it's actually probably the easiest option, because all you have to do is enter your MediaBridge control panel. Careful again, this is MediaBridge control panel, not the one for the template. This is your admin for MediaBridge, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you're using MediaBridge. And you go to the Push Services tab, and you select New HTTP Request, and here are the instructions, and then you enter this URL for the request. And if Solver Sensor is enabled, you include the Solver data here. You save the changes, and for MediaBridge, you should use 5 minutes, because MediaBridge is able to send you the aggregated data, so it already sends the maximum, minimum, etc. So you're okay with just 5 minutes. However, for these, as I've mentioned, the database will have data in 5-minute intervals. However, you're probably wondering, well, I want my data more often. Now, as I said, this would slow down the database. So what I did is, and that's something that I explained here. So if you want to know exactly how that works, then I explained that in the wiki. I explain how to do that here. Go to the updates page here. Basically what happens is, let's say you have your client raw uploaded to the FTP every 1 minute. Then you would set your cron job to 1 minute as well. And what's going to happen is the update script is going to load data from your client raw every 1 minute, or whatever interval you set for your cron job. But it's going to check what was the last time when your database was updated. And if it was not 5 minutes, it will simply cache the data. So it will create a temporary cache file, which will, and it will save the current content of the client raw in that file. And then that can happen, okay, in case we're using 1 minute, that will happen 5 times. And after 5 minutes, we have this cache file which includes 5 different client raw files. And then it will aggregate the data, and it will find the minimum, maximum, average, whatever, and save that to the database. So your data will be in 5-minute intervals in the database, but it will use the 1-minute data that it loaded via the cron job. So if your client raw, for example, is uploaded to your server every 2 minutes, then there is probably no point in setting the cron job for 1 minute, because it would simply load the same file 2 times. So make sure that this is not shorter than whatever upload interval you use. And it doesn't have to be whether it's by, of course, be 3 minutes. But as I said, with MediaBridge it's different, because MediaBridge already aggregates the data. So for MediaBridge, you simply set it 5 minutes. And if we're using Weather Underground, then it's actually very simple. We just enter our Weather Underground station ID. And again, we can try the test. And we set up the cron job. And in this case, we use the exact same script, but we save the settings. We say that we want to use Weather Underground. That's what the settings file will save. It will just say, I want to use Weather Underground. It will save your ID. And then this script would be for your cron job to execute and do the update. And again, for Weather Underground, you would probably use 5 minutes, and that's because that's the logging interval of Weather Underground. And in case you just use some other method, and I know that, for example, some people might use a Raspberry Pi or whatever. Let's say you have a custom file which contains the current conditions, and it's being uploaded at regular intervals to your server. Then you can basically use it just like you can use the client raw or real time. But because it's a custom file, you now have to tell the script what that file looks like. First of all, you tell it where it can find it. So this will be the URL of your file. And make sure you include the file, the name of the file and the extension. So it will be something like this: your site, mysite.com/ and it's a custom file .text. And here you would specify the field delimiter, decimal separator, date. Now, if you didn't want, I will not go through this because it works exactly the same way as the data import. So if you want to use this option and you haven't watched the data importing videos, then please watch that, because that's where I explain this, and it works exactly the same. The way you set up these fields, the way you set up the date and time, it's exactly the same as for the import script. So in that case, just watch that video and it will show you how to use all this. And then we again have the update script. That would be the one for which we set our cron job. Now you might be wondering, well, you said there are other options as well, and yes, that's true. If you look here, the other options are WeatherCat, NetAtmo, WeatherLink, and WeatherView. And for WeatherView, you will simply use the custom file, because it depends on whatever file you created, and you can set WeatherView to again create some sort of a text file with current conditions, and depending on the format you use, you then set it up here and use the custom file option. For these three, for WeatherCat, NetAtmo, and WeatherLink, there is a plugin. And I will talk about how to install a plugin. So in case you want to use one of these three, just watch the videos about how to install a plugin and then use this plugin to do it. And I will have a separate video for either of these, but I will, for those of you who use one of these first four options, that's not relevant. So for now we can just leave it there, and in some other video file I will show you how to do the other ones.